Russian man like inside the dark, call me Bill Snatcher. Just the brother for the rapture. I hang live, holding on strong, hard to capture. Extravagant, resurrect the track and it's militant. And I react like a convict and start killing. It's manifesting. The God's work like appliances, dealing in my sleep like a lot.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy Naruto Explained here, and today we're going to be diving pretty deep into the Naruto lore for a video that I know a lot of you guys have been asking me for a while, which is to break down every single Sage Mode Jutsu ever. Now, this video is going to be very similar to what I've done in the past, where I explored every single Rinnegan Jutsu ever, where I broke down all the Rinnegan Jutsu that are in existence up to the time of that recording. Getting right into it, as we all know, Sage Mode is one of the strongest techniques that a ninja can learn in the series, with Sage Mode users being some of the most powerful in the entire franchise. However, there are different types of Sage Mode, each with their own individual advantages that differentiates itself from all the others. You've got the Toad Sage Mode that Naruto, Minato, Jiraiya, and Kashin Koji use, which that's probably what you're most familiar with when you hear the word Sage Mode. You've also got the Snake Sage Mode that Kabuto uses. Then you've got the unconfirmed variation of Sage Mode that Hashirama uses, which a lot of people refer to as Slug Sage Mode by process of elimination, but there's no confirmation in the series this is actually the case. In any event, each of these augments the speed, the strength, the stamina, durability, and all physical stats all across the board. However, the disadvantage of Sage Mode is that it's impossible to enter into the form while moving in combat due to the requirement of being perfectly still, unless you're able to outright bypass these limitations in the creative manner that Kabuto and Naruto did. Now that you got a brief refresher on what Sage Mode is, let's look at the various Sage Mode Jutsu, and for clarification, I'm going to be including Senjutsu attacks like the Demonic Illusion, Frog, Genjutsu in this video, just to make them easier to find, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll leave those jutsu at the very end of the video as a bonus round. Starting things off is one of my personal favorite Sage Mode Jutsu, which is the Sage Art Inorganic Reanimation Jutsu, which was used by Kabuto. Essentially, the user of this jutsu takes nature energy and fuses it into inorganic substances, which allows the user to alter the environment in massive ways. The speed at which the inorganic objects move is fast enough that even Sharingan users like Itachi and Sasuke have trouble with it, and it makes a lot of sense. This jutsu essentially makes the entire battlefield into a weapon that can be used for offensive or defensive purposes, depending on how it's used. Now, the main weakness of this jutsu is that for as overpowered as it is, it can easily be countered under the right circumstances by someone capable of generating extremely high heat via fire release that is at a bare minimum as hot as Amaterasu, which that says a lot because Amaterasu is extremely hot itself. Now, the Sage Art Amphibian Jutsu is another jutsu I like, but this one is purely supplemental in nature. The jutsu is done by summoning Shima and Fukasaku as Toad summons, who then fuse with the user. By doing so, it ramps up the Sage Mode chakra to its absolute peak for the user, which also gives the user the ability to maintain access to Sage Mode chakra while moving, because the two toads that are merged onto the body are constantly drawing in Sage Mode chakra for the user. Now, the reason why I like this jutsu so much is that it's another classic example of how Masashi Kishimoto will use Japanese mythology, or he will use his deranged kanji to progress the story. For this jutsu, it's more so the kanji usage. While it isn't dirty doublespeak like Masashi Kishimoto is known for, it is still kanji that makes use of double meaning. Ryosei is typically used for the word amphibian, but the kanji breaks down even further into it being two lives, which makes perfect sense given the fact that Jiraiya has two extra beings that are being merged onto his body. Or you can take it a step further and say that the two toads represent one life force while he represents another. It's a pretty clever usage of the kanji when you look at it. The next Sage Mode Jutsu is a bit of a long one. It is the 5 Fire Gods Fan of Flames Jutsu. Now, given the super long name, you would think this was a jutsu made by Minato. However, this is actually a jutsu made by Kashin Koji, the cyborg clone of Jiraiya. Using this jutsu, Koji summons an enormous amount of fire that creates a flame wall that both acts as a deterrent for his enemy, while also allowing Kashin Koji to escape the enemy's field of vision or use it to set up his next attack. Now, the fire release flame bullet jutsu is used by Jiraiya, and it's a Sage Mode attack that infuses Sage Mode chakra via the oil inside of the mouth that is infused with Senjutsu chakra. Once the oil is shot out, it lights on fire and creates anywhere from one flame attack to several flame attacks. When it's used in a confined space, it's a really good way to seal off all the exit routes of the enemy, and when it's used to its maximum, it can completely incinerate an entire summoning animal, and some of those summoning animals are pretty damn big, so that's very high heat. Up next, we have the Sage Art Gracious Deity Gates Jutsu, which is an attack used by Hashirama Senju. Now, this jutsu is a rather interesting one to look at because it's also another example of Kishimoto using Asian influences for his jutsu. In this case, it's the Torii gates that are found most commonly at the entrance of Shinto shrines. The interesting thing about this is that Hashirama is known for wood release, and these gates are typically made out of wood and stone. Now, the jutsu itself you'll recognize from the battle with the Ten Tails, where Hashirama summoned one of these in order to restrain the Jubi in the battle. The unique thing about these gates is that on top of its sheer binding power, which makes it impossible to move, it will also adjust in accordance to size with whatever it is that it's restraining. And that makes it even crazier is that it also strips away the will of the person that's caught into it, making it nearly impossible for them to attempt to try and fight back out of this jutsu. Hashirama isn't just limited to one Torii in this jutsu either, because he can stack several on top of each other of whatever target he is trying to restrain. Like when he tried to restrain the Ten Tails, he summoned a bunch of them. Hashirama tends to use his jutsu in the following ways. The first, using the head seal, which makes one massive Torii that slams onto the neck of his enemy, which keeps them from moving, and the target is flooded with nature energy to prevent them from trying to escape. Now, the 10 seals version of this jutsu is exactly what it sounds like. It produces 10 of these that can immobilize up to 10 enemies at once, or if it's a really big object, it can immobilize, say, a tailed beast with these. Now, the Sage Art Wood Release 1000 Hands Jutsu is another overpowered jutsu by Hashirama. Hashirama makes a giant wooden statue that's bigger in size than the full body version of Kurama or Perfect Susanoo. 1000 hands pop up on the back, and the hands can be used to unleash a maelstrom of taijutsu blows, or they can be used to perform other jutsu. Hashirama takes the target and it makes it damn near impossible to avoid any of these attacks because he's literally throwing 1000 hands at the target. Hashirama can also detach the jutsu for further mobility and to pick up more speed, and the raw power of the attacks are enough that it can bully tail beasts into submission. Now, just like the jutsu that we just talked about, this jutsu also has roots in Asian mythology and Buddhism, with this one coming from the story of Senju Kanon. Kanon had a goal of not resting until he was able to release every being from samsara, which for those of you guys who don't know what samsara is, samsara means world. It also is a cycle of death and rebirth in the material world in which people are bound. It was a lofty goal, one that after an enormous amount of effort resulted in his head being split up into 11 different pieces. The Buddha then gives each of these 11 heads ears so they can better hear the suffering of others and gain comprehension into the suffering, but this resulted in him reaching out to those who were in need and shattering his hands into 1,000 pieces, and then the Buddha then grants him 1000 hands to help those who are in need, which is why this jutsu has 1000 hands. The Sage Art Giant Rasengan Barrage is done by Naruto, making dozens of shadow clones that enter into Sage mode that transform the Rasengan into a super giant Rasengan with enough striking force that one half of Kurama is subdued by the attack. Next, we have another personal Sage mode jutsu of mine, which is the Sage Art White Rage Jutsu. This one allows Kabuto to shoot out a red dragon of chakra from his mouth that happens to carry a small orb of chakra in its claw. The dragon wraps itself around the orb, and when it does so, it shoots off a blinding light and a deafening sound that creates an intense vibration that paralyzes everybody that's in the area. Now, because Kabuto had to liquefy his body using the hidden jutsu of Suigetsu Suzuki clan, it can be argued that this jutsu potentially does damage to the jutsu caster as well as the target of the jutsu itself due to the intensity of the sound vibrations. Now, Frog Kumite is the taijutsu fighting style mastered by those who are trained at Mount Miyaboku and can use Toad Sage mode. Nature energy wraps itself around the body of the user, and it can't be seen by the person that they're fighting. Even somebody that has, like, say, a Sharingan or a Rinnegan or a Byakugan, they can't see it. This also allows the user to extend the range of their attacks, which allows for moments where even after a punch misses, the attack still lands on the target despite the user's fist not physically touching the target. The reason why this form of fighting is so cool to me is that not only do you have the chakra amp strength that people like Sakura and Tsunade have, but you also don't have to directly land a hit on a person in order to do damage. The frog slap jutsu is used by Naruto, and that's also a form of frog kumite. This one sends shockwaves of Senjutsu chakra into the target that damages the target from the inside, which should in a way remind you of the gentle fist fighting style, because that damages the chakra points and it causes internal damage itself. While Naruto can't target the chakra points himself because he doesn't have a Byakugan, he is able to do internal damage to the person that he's fighting. The giant Rosten Shuriken is used by Naruto, who enters into Sage mode, and as the name implies, he creates a giant Rosten Shuriken that has enough chakra being pumped into it that it makes the size so big that when it detonates, it can be seen from several miles away after its impact, and has enough force behind it that it can destroy even Hashirama's wood dragons, which that says a lot in of itself. Now, we're going to be closing this one out by going over the Senjutsu attacks on the toads from Mount Miyaboku, what they can use. While Naruto himself hasn't actually used these, in theory, it would be possible for him to learn some of these jutsu since they are Senjutsu in nature. The Sage Art Wind Release Dust Cloud Jutsu shoots out a major cloud of wind that whips up a dust storm that covers the horizontal length of the battlefield and can stretch vertically as high as a giant toad summoning like Gamabunta. For this jutsu, obviously it's a good choice to use if one was trying to escape from the enemy or you're trying to conceal your movements. Now, this next one is very interesting. So, Tongue Battle Slash is a jutsu that is done by molding Sage Mode chakra and transforming the tongue into a sharp blade that shoots out the mouth with enough power to strike through metal pipes. It's worth noting that this jutsu in the anime is shown as a stream of water, which takes away from the double speak that Masashi Kishimoto did here with this deranged kanji for this jutsu. So Mom Pato, they spend all time arguing, right? Well, this jutsu translates into tongue battle, which is very fitting given that the two married toads are always arguing and Pato is being characterized as having a sharp tongue. In this case, a tongue literally sharp enough to cut through steel pipes. That's why you hear me say Kishimoto's deranged kanji is so interesting when you know what to look for. Now, the frog song jutsu is done by focusing Sage Mode chakra into the throat that shoots out in sound waves that briefly are able to create vibrations powerful enough to paralyze the enemy. It's nothing on the level of the White Rage jutsu by Kabuto, but it's still pretty effective nonetheless. Now, this next one's going to be tying into the jutsu before the frog song jutsu. So that being the tongue battle slash jutsu. The jutsu I'm going to be talking about now is the binding tongue jutsu. It's another fascinating one that builds off of Kishimoto's deranged kanji. So the translation tongue battle also extends to Mato via her binding tongue jutsu. Essentially, after she molds Senjutsu chakra, her tongue grows into a massive size. It protrudes from her mouth and it grows a face on the edge of it. The tongue then seeks out the scent of a target and traps the target before it can escape, all while marking it with a special chemical that is used to allow Pato to track it down by following the scent and slash it with this tongue slash. It's kind of fitting that the two jutsu that have deranged kanji doublespeak by Kishimoto, in this case tongue battle, and the two toads who argue all the time have jutsu that rely on one another. It's another clever example of Kishimoto's deranged kanji. Finally, we have the demonic illusion toad song, which you guys saw when Jiraiya fought against Pain. Essentially, this jutsu needs a bit of prep time to pull off because the two toads have to be in perfect harmony with one another, but it allows them to place the target and anyone who hears the jutsu under a genjutsu. The genjutsu then places the targets inside of a barrier, and the targets then get the secret swords that are summoned from Mount Miyaboku, and then the targets get the secret swords that are summoned from Mount Miyaboku plunged into their hearts. Now, the downside to this jutsu is that you need a lot of prep time to pull it off, which means that you need allies on the battlefield to help hide you or distract the enemy while you get the jutsu ready. However, that's going to be it for every single Sage Mode jutsu ever. Let me know what your favorite jutsu is. Now, for those of you guys who are wondering why I didn't cover Mitsuki's snake lightning jutsu that he uses when he uses Senjutsu, I want to leave that one off because we know that Mitsuki, his body is still growing, and using that much sage power for a lengthy period of time does cause some problems, but everybody pretty much expects him to be able to master that power at one point to where there aren't any negatives, which means that this version of the attack might be very different in the future. It will be kind of like discussing every single Rasengan ever and doing so during the Akatsuki suppression arc when the Rosten Shuriken started out as a jutsu that couldn't be thrown, and then a few arcs later, Naruto was able to throw it. So I'm holding that one off just to see what happens with Mitsuki. However, let me know what your favorite Sage Mode Jutsu is down in the comment section below. So always, guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Have an awesome day, guys.